In November of 2013, hunter Tom McIntosh was walking along the snowy bank of a narrow stream in the George Washington National Forest when he noticed a motionless female figure in the icy water. At first, he thought it was a mannequin, abandoned after some tourist prank or the shadow of a tree distorted by the morning fog. But when he got closer, he realized that there was a living person standing in front of him, not moving, not speaking, and seemingly unaware of his own presence. His eyes were empty. The skin was bluish. His clothes were torn, unsuitable for the cold that had been going on for several days. This was the end of the 5-month silence surrounding the disappearance of Kelsey Lynn, a young hiker who hiked the Appalachian Trail in the summer and simply disappeared from the world. She was searched for a long time and without success, attributed to an accident, to the wild, to the fact that the mountains take their own and do not return. But they did. And what happened to her during this time turned out to be more terrible than most stories about those who never returned. On the morning of June 23, 2013, 24-year-old Kelsey Lynn parked her dark sedan in a small parking lot near Swift Run Pass in the central part of the Appalachian Trail. The time of her arrival was later reconstructed from traffic cameras and from a hiker from Pittsburgh who saw her taking a backpack out of the trunk and checking the attachment of her trekking poles. According to him, Kelsey looked calm, moving confidently and quickly, like someone who has been here before. Kelsey was planning a 3-day hike north toward the area where the ridge turned into the stone outcroppings of Bearfence Mountain. Before she left a note in the visitor's log about her plan to return. In 3 days, but did not specify a time. The weather was warm, but the forecast warned of a storm front. The traces of the later storm would be confirmed by the Augusta County Weather Station. Wind gusts and heavy rain hit the area that very night. The last documented image of Kelsey is a photo taken by another hiker near a wooden sign at the beginning of the trail. He said that she asked him to press a button on her phone, and she stood with her back to the trail. A few minutes later, Kelsey disappeared into a pine corridor that led deeper into the forest. When the scheduled 3 days passed and Kelsey did not show up at her car or make contact, the girl's mother, who was waiting for her evening call, contacted a Richmond police dispatcher. The National Park Service formed an initial search team the next morning. Her route was reconstructed based on the visitor log, hikers' testimonies, and footprints found. The rescuers combed the main ridge, old forest roads, and landslide zones where debris usually accumulates after storms. The search quickly became complicated due to the dense forest canopy and stone faults, where sounds were lost after a few tens of yards. According to the official report of the Rangers, several times they had to work under thunderstorms that hit the eastern slopes of the mountains late in the evening. A week later, more volunteers from Augusta County joined the operation. The head of the local search and rescue team said they expanded their search to include abandoned mine adits near the abandoned Elkton Quarry and narrow passages along the South River. It was there, according to investigators, that the dogs picked up a faint trail several times, but lost direction after 100 yards. The Virginia National Guard twice sent a helicopter to inspect the upper layer of the forest. Dense crowns almost completely blocked visibility, and thermal imaging sensors showed no abnormal markings. All that could be found from the air were areas of collapsed soil after heavy rains, which could have led the investigation in the wrong direction. The only real thing that could have belonged to Kelsey was her phone. It was found by a Waynesboro volunteer in a thicket of ferns, estimated to be several miles east of her original route. The phone was completely dead and covered with a layer of silt, as if it had been in the rain for days. There was no sign of her nearby, no belongings, no shoe prints. This place was so far off the trail that the Rangers called it uncharacteristic of a hiker who knows the trail in their report. By the end of the second week, the search teams began to shrink. According to the official protocol, the area covered was several dozen miles, including areas where even experienced hikers do not usually go. All the trails ended either on a rock or on a windbreak, where the storm had washed away possible landmarks. When the end of July came, the operations leadership decided to put the case on cold turkey. There were no new clues, and the weather conditions were worsening the chances of finding anything. Kelsey's car was removed from the parking lot, and information about her was entered into the federal database as a person missing under unexplained circumstances. The forest regained its silence, which no one tried to break for a long time. The 5 months after Kelsey Lynn's disappearance dragged on empty and fruitless. Search reports lay in the metal filing cabinets of the Augusta County Sheriff's Office, and a dusty and crumpled form with her name on it was passed from folder to folder without a single new entry. A private investigator from Shenandoah Solutions would occasionally visit the Swift Run area, looking at old maps, asking about strange sounds or lights in the woods, but no one ever gave him a scrap of information that could move the investigation forward. It seemed that Kelsey had disappeared as completely as the morning fog appears, with no way to retrace her steps. On November 15, 2013, the temperature plummeted. According to the National Weather Service, the first ice of the season formed in the upper valleys of the George Washington Forest, and at night it was snowing lightly. That morning, a hunter from Staunton, Tom McIntosh, headed deep into the forest along a narrow stream that flowed into the South River. In a later report, he would state that he chose this particular area because of deer tracks he had seen the day before. According to McIntosh, about an hour after leaving, he noticed a dark silhouette ahead. From a distance, it looked like something carried by water or abandoned by someone long ago. The silhouette was standing in shallow water, where the current was barely audible. Tom said that at first he thought it was an injured animal, but the shape was too human, too straight. As he got closer, he realized it was a woman. She was standing in icy water that reached her ankles. Her hair, according to the witness, was stuck together, as if someone had poured dirty water over it, and her face was a pale gray. She was wearing thin, torn leggings and a light sweater that could not protect her from even a cool September morning, let alone a November frost. She did not tremble, which seemed unnatural to the hunter. The report stated, "The patient did not respond to the voice. Her eyes were fixed on a fixed point." Tom approached slowly and cautiously, fearing she would fall into the water. When he touched her shoulder, the woman turned her head so slowly that, according to McIntosh, it looked like the movement of someone who had been frozen or in shock for a long time. Her gaze was empty, not frightened, not confused, but as if there was no awareness left inside. She did not identify herself in any way. When asked if she could hear him, she did not respond. All this information would later be recorded in the initial report of the emergency service. McIntosh reported the discovery via radio. As the area was remote, the signal was poor, so the transmission took several minutes. A search and rescue team from the National Park Service went to the site, but it was difficult to get to the location. They had to walk across a rough ravine and wet rocks. When the rescuers arrived, the woman was still standing in the water. While trying to carefully bring her to the shore, she suddenly clung to a smooth stone with her fingers so that one of her nails broke. The paramedics' report states, "The movements were defensive in nature. The patient did not allow to move away from the place of standing. She was wrapped in a thermal blanket and carried on a stretcher. Her reaction was minimal. She did not resist, but did not help either." One of the rescuers noted in the report, "It seemed that the patient was afraid of the space around her or did not recognize it. It took several hours to get her to the road where an ambulance was waiting." At the stabilization point at the Augusta Valley Medical Center, doctors recorded severe hypothermia, dehydration, and exhaustion. During the initial examination, she could not answer any questions. She did not know her name, did not know what had happened, did not remember how she ended up in the forest. At that time, the doctors did not know who exactly they had brought. Only after some time, when her fingerprints were entered into the national database, did a match appear. The person standing in the water was Kelsey Lynn, who had been missing since June. They had explanations ahead of them that no one was ready for. When the rescuers brought Kelsey Lynn to the emergency room of the Augusta Valley Medical Center, the doctor on duty immediately recorded 3 critical indicators: deep hypothermia, severe dehydration, and severe exhaustion. According to the medical record drawn up the same morning, her body temperature was so low that the staff had to apply active warming to the whole body, not just locally. The patient did not answer questions, was not oriented in space, and did not respond to her own name when it was spoken predictably or out loud. After initial stabilization, the doctors conducted a standard identification protocol. The patient was photographed, her fingerprints were taken, and they were transferred to a national database. A match came back within minutes. The woman found in the woods was Kelsey Joan Lynn, a Richmond citizen who had gone missing in June. The result was confirmed by a second check. After the identification, the clinic administration contacted her mother. According to a nurse who was present during the meeting, the woman entered the room quickly, but when she saw her daughter, she stopped abruptly. She said that she recognized Kelsey immediately, by her face and hands, which hadn't changed the way she was afraid they would. However, Kelsey's reaction was paradoxical. She looked at her mother without any hint of recognition. According to the medical staff, her gaze was neutral and empty, as if she were looking at a stranger. The clinic's psychiatrist, after a brief examination, made a preliminary diagnosis of dissociative amnesia, a condition that often occurs after severe mental or physical stress. In the report, he noted that the patient does not remember her own name, background, or the events of the past months. There is no orientation in time and place. But the most noticeable were the physical details that should not have been there. When doctors examined her hands, they saw dense, deep calluses on the palms and phalanges of her fingers. According to her mother, Kelsey did not do manual labor. She worked as a web designer, and her physical activity was limited to regular hiking and exercise. The calluses looked like she had been pulling, chopping, or working with rough tools for a long time. On the right ankle, on the inside, there was a fresh, not yet fully healed tattoo, a narrow broken line, similar to the outline of an inverted mountain or a symbolic dash. The skin around it was irritated, as if the tattoo had been done recently and in an unprofessional manner. Kelsey's mother confirmed that her daughter had never had a tattoo and that she had not expressed any intention of getting one. The Augusta County Police Department sent 2 detectives to the hospital. The report indicates that attempts to ask Kelsey basic questions — what was her name? Did she know where she was? Who was holding her? Did she remember the trail? — were unsuccessful. She either remained silent, stared at a point, or hid her hands under the covers. One of the detectives noted in his written report, "The patient shows no signs of deliberate evasion. She appears to have no real memory of events, people, or her own identity." The doctors confirmed that the patient has no traces of bruises, changes in bone structure, internal organ damage, or fractures. However, the appearance of her clothes, leggings with numerous tears in several places, a sweater with dirty traces of soil and plants, indicated that she had been in conditions far from civilized and clearly longer than one night. A separate paragraph of the report recorded the odors that the hospital staff smelled: the smell of smoke, wood chips, and damp earth. It remained on her hair even after washing it. The fact of complete amnesia meant that the investigation could not be continued using traditional methods. Investigators had no description of the possible perpetrator, no location where Kelsey might have been, and no details that would allow them to reconstruct her path after her disappearance. All the data obtained in the first hours after the identification led to a dead end. According to the medical report, Kelsey must have spent an extremely long time in low temperatures. But this could not have been the case. The temperature in the November forest was fatal without warm clothing. None of the hypotheses explained how she survived. Her story seemed to begin not with the moment of her disappearance, but with the morning she was found in the water, with the look of a person who seemed to have returned not from the forest, but from another reality in which no memory of her own life remained. After more than a week of intensive treatment at Augusta Valley Clinic, doctors decided to temporarily discharge Kelsey home under the supervision of her mother. The official justification in the discharge letter was restrained. Mental condition is stable. There is no acute threat. Further therapy in an outpatient setting is necessary. In reality, the doctors simply recognized that the clinic had no tools to restore her memory. Her mother took Kelsey home to a quiet neighborhood in Richmond. According to a neighbor who saw them that day, the girl walked like a person who doesn't even recognize her own shoes. She reacted to familiar objects with alienation and to her own room as if she were seeing it for the first time. A generalized look, no emotion, neither joy nor sadness. The nights were the biggest challenge. On the first day, her mother called a psychologist after the girl woke up screaming. The report drawn up by the specialist stated, "The patient described soporific images without clear logic. Dark trees, falling water, shadows moving slowly, hands that cannot be identified." The report went on to state that while describing the dreams, Kelsey spoke in fragments, as if she was afraid to say certain words. The psychological sessions lasted several times a week. During one of them, the specialist decided to show Kelsey various photographs of Appalachian trails collected from ranger reports and travel blogs. It was an attempt to activate her visual memory. At the 16th photo, a trail near a site with a flooded, rotten bore rock. Kelsey's reaction changed. She looked up abruptly, as if she recognized something. "The smell," she said, according to the psychologist. "The smell of rot and water, dripping. It's always dripping." This was the first meaningful memory. It was only a fragment, but experts regarded it as a significant breakthrough. It was also the first signal to investigators that it was worth revisiting the areas associated with constant humidity and flooded areas. A few days later, a second case occurred, this time outside of therapy. Kelsey and her mother were walking past a hardware store in Staunton when she suddenly stopped and, according to her mother, seemed to whisper a word she wasn't supposed to know. The word was quarry. The word was quiet but clear enough for the mother to report it to an Augusta County detective. The detective, referring to previous search maps, immediately recalled the abandoned Elkton Quarry, which was located a few miles from where Kelsey's trail last passed. At the official request of the police, a new search team went to the quarry the next morning. The team leader's report stated that the meter-high thickets of blackberries and wild maple made it very difficult to move. The quarry had been abandoned for a long time. Its approaches were eroded by rain, and the old machinery was rusting under a thick layer of moss. It was in these thickets, a few hundred yards from the main pit, that the ranger noticed uneven earthen protrusions. These were the remains of a dilapidated dugout covered with branches. The ranger examined the dugout slowly and carefully. Inside, they found a makeshift tarpaulin tent sewn with rough stitches to wooden supports, several rusty cans of soup and beans lined up on the ground in a row, as if someone had stored them systematically. A wooden bowl carved with a knife from an unhewn piece of log. The letter K was carved on its side surface. The forensic report stated that the bowl was clearly handmade and did not look like a factory product. The depth of the notches indicated that a person had spent time and effort working with a knife or cutter. Fingerprints were found on one of the cans that did not match the state's databases. That is, the person in the dugout was not a registered criminal, had no criminal record, and had not previously appeared in criminal cases. The surrounding area had traces of ancient campfires mixed with layers of fallen leaves. Forensic experts found that the fires had been burning periodically for a long time. The report indicates that the ground was leveled in several places with a palm or a piece of wood, a characteristic mark of people who live off-grid and provide for themselves without tools. Experts estimated the approximate time when the dugout could have been used as the months before the discovery. This meant only one thing: someone had been living there not long ago, and that someone was related to Kelsey. The police officially confirmed that no signs of a struggle or blood were found in the dugout, but the conditions inside were clearly not a voluntary shelter. A bed of moss and dry grass was pressed into the ground in the shape of a single body. There was no sign of heating or ventilation. Small traces of soot were found on the tarpaulin, a hint that someone had lit a fire inside or near the entrance, avoiding smoke that could attract attention. Several short scratches were found among the inner walls of the dugout. The expert noted that they were not animal tracks. The scratches were horizontal, parallel to each other, as if from fingernails or a thin metal object. The official police conclusion was formulated as dryly as possible. The structure found was probably used for a long stay of one person. Kelsey Lynn may have been held here for a period of time. Who exactly held her in the dugout, how long she was there, and why the tattoo on her ankle matched the scratches on the wall? There were no answers to these questions at the time. Only silence and an empty earthen hole from which someone seemed to have disappeared as completely as Kelsey herself had many months earlier. The dugout, found in the thicket near the abandoned Elkton Quarry, was immediately taped off. Augusta County officers recorded the coordinates and handed the site over to forensics. The initial report stated that the structure looked freshly abandoned. The ground had not yet settled evenly, and the tarp at the entrance showed signs of recent use, such as soot residue and damp areas. The forensic experts worked slowly, centimeter by centimeter. They marked the area with squares, as they do at disappearance sites in national forests. Among the trash, they found an object that became the first real clue since Kelsey herself was found. It was a fragment of a topographic map. The paper was torn at the edge, crumpled, but the hand-drawn markings were still visible. Lines drawn in pencil marked trails that did not appear on official National Park Service maps. One of the hand-drawn lines was surrounded by two concentric circles. Its coordinates corresponded to the headwaters of the Staunton River, the place where Kelsey was found months later standing in the water. There were several other marks nearby, but their meaning remained unclear. Experts suggested that these routes could have been the personal paths of a person who knew the forest so well that he or she could navigate without official maps. The second item was a piece of a belt with a metal clasp. The leather was darkened and cracked, but clearly not old. The manufacturer could not be identified as the markings were worn off. The metal part was sent for examination, but the preliminary conclusion only confirmed that the belt was made by an artisanal method or by a very small manufacturer that is not included in the general supervision databases. Meanwhile, in Richmond, psychologists began to get the first clearer snippets of memory from Kelsey. Not sequentially, not logically, but in fragments, as if torn from a dream. She described a cold dirt floor that was always damp. She recalled that she was called Swallow, a word recorded in the psychologist's report as a verbatim quote from the patient. She spoke of feeling the presence of a person who did not raise his voice, but made the threat clear by his silence. One of the most important fragments was that the kidnapper, or whoever was holding her, forced her to collect medicinal herbs. The medical records mention that Kelsey called them bitter with a pungent odor. When a psychologist showed her images of plants typical of the George Washington forest, she recognized several types of roots and leaves that are commonly collected by medicine men or people living off the grid in the forest. This explained the calluses, deep, dense, and not caused by normal hiking or computer work. The calluses were of different depths. Some indicated repetitive work with ropes or rough cloth. Others indicated carrying weight over long distances. The detectives had high hopes for the fingerprints from the dugout. They compared them not only to state databases, but also to federal archives. Nothing matched, not criminal records, not the prints of discharged soldiers, not the prints of people who had disappeared into the woods of Virginia. This meant only one thing. The kidnapper lived outside the system. A person without documents, without history, without registration. Someone who could be in the middle of nowhere for years and not show up where government agencies work. The term forest hermit appeared in the investigator's dossier for the first time. This is an unofficial wording, but it was used in the reports. Such people sometimes lived in national forests, avoiding contact with society. Some are peaceful, some are unpredictable, especially after prolonged isolation. Police have increased patrols in the areas around the quarry, the Staunton headwaters, and old hunting trails. The National Park Service brought in rangers from neighboring counties, but without witnesses, it was all in vain. Several hikers reported strange noises in the woods' footsteps, whistles, snapping branches, but the Park Service noted in their reports that these accounts could not be verified. Detectives speculated that the person holding Kelsey could sense the movements of search teams and avoid them before they approached. This assumption was based on the nature of the area: dense undergrowth, numerous ravines, stone outcroppings that allowed for covert observation and hearing movements from afar. The forest remained silent. There were no footprints, no remnants of clothing, no new objects of everyday life. It seemed that the man who lived in the dugout knew the forest so well that he could become invisible as he had been when Kelsey first appeared in his arms. A few weeks after Kelsey's discharge, memories began to appear as suddenly as they had disappeared. Most of them were fragmentary, lacking logic, but one therapy session was a turning point. The psychologist who worked with her on a regular basis told detectives that during an auditory reconstruction exercise, Kelsey suddenly changed her expression, abruptly, almost painfully. She closed her eyes and said she heard a whistle, not just a sound, but a melody. She repeated a few notes, and the psychologist recognized the motif. The song, "Z Water of the Y," is an old folk tune often played at village gatherings in the mountainous regions of Virginia. Kelsey had never heard it herself. The psychologist was sure of this because she did not recognize any recordings of it during memory tests. The memory could only belong to a period she did not remember. When the detectives received this information, they checked local community event archives in western Augusta County. It turned out that the song was popular in the small village of Goshen. Local musicians played it at annual fairs, and older residents whistled it on rutted paths near Mill Creek. The two detectives traveled to Goshen. This village consisted of a few old buildings along the highway, a shabby warehouse, a gas station, and the Goshen General Store, which was both a bar and a meeting place for locals. It was there that the officers spoke to a bartender who had been working there for more than 2 decades. He confirmed that the tune was often hummed by a man named Jesse Claybornne. The bartender described him as tall, silent, with gray hair and a prominent scar on his right forearm. According to him, Claybornne was a former logger. He worked for private logging crews for most of his life, before moving to the wilderness after a tragedy. His family died in a fire on their farm more than a decade ago. After that incident, he hardly ever went to the city, appearing in Goshen only a few times a year to buy salt, medical alcohol, and pieces of tarpaulin. According to the bartender, the last time Claybornne came to General Store was about a year ago. Back then, he bought battery-powered flashlights and canned food. Then he just disappeared, the bartender said. The detective's report noted that his description partially matched Kelsey's memories: tall, gray hair, a scar, and a way of moving slowly and silently. After obtaining a warrant, police inspected an abandoned cabin that Claybornne had rented for many years on the outskirts of Goshen. The road to the cabin was almost impassable: dense overgrowth, clay, and old tracks blocked by rubble. According to the landowner, Claybornne paid cash for the land and never used the main trail. instead walking directly through the thicket so that no one could track his route. The hut was small, skewed, and had broken windows. Inside, we found traces of long-term habitation: a stone stove, a makeshift table, ropes, an old well bucket, and scattered newspaper scraps. In the corner were notebooks written in uneven handwriting. They contained notes on plants that grew in the area: blackroot, blue willow, bitter wormwood, snakeroot. These were the same plants that Kelsey recognized during the sessions. The detectives were particularly alarmed by the fact that one of the pages contained names paired with symptoms: for pain, for fever, apply to the leg, powder from the root, dry. This description was consistent with primitive medicine, something that could be used to keep a person alive in complete isolation. Near the table, they found pieces of tarpaulin almost identical to those used to make the tent in the dugout. They had the same threads, the same type of wear on the edges. Experts confirmed the match. Inside the hut, there were no signs of a struggle or traces of blood, but an old military jacket was found in the pantry. A thin rope, similar to the one seen in the dugout, was sewn to the inside pocket. Several hairs of unknown origin were found on it. The forensic documents do not indicate a match, but confirm that the hair belonged to a woman. Boot prints were also found near the door. They were old, but the tread pattern was consistent with the type of footwear often worn by loggers. The size of the boots matched the evidence about Claybornne. All of this formed a disturbing but logical chain. Kelsey had heard this song whistling. The song was specific to Goshen. There was only one person in Goshen who whistled it all the time. This person lived as a hermit, knew the herbs, used a tarpaulin, and disappeared around the time Kelsey herself disappeared. There was no direct evidence, but the coincidences were becoming too many to ignore. The Claybornne cabin was silent, not the natural silence of the forest, but the silence of a place that had been left in a hurry, as if someone knew it might be visited. After inspecting the hut on the outskirts of Goshen, the police officially put Jesse Claybornne on the wanted list. A notice was sent to all state police departments, as well as to the National Park Service, which controlled the forests around the Appalachian Trail. The dossier noted that the suspect had experience in the wilderness, knew how to use tools, knew the topography of the area, and could stay off the main trails for months. Special attention was paid to his notebooks seized from the hut. They contained handwritten notes on plants, climate, animal behavior, and a list of places to hide. Among them were several entries about spare holes and old pits located in hard-to-reach places in the forest. Forensic experts identified one of these locations, an abandoned wolf pit, which, according to forestry archives, was dug in the first half of the last century by a hunting team. It was located several miles from the official routes, in an area where cell phone service had never worked. When a group of rangers and detectives arrived there, it became clear that the camp had been used recently. The entire perimeter had been trampled by feet, and in the center of a small clearing was a folded camp. A plastic tarp, the remains of a tarp, a log on which someone was sitting, a few stones placed in a circle. Everything looked as if the owner would return at any moment. On the ground, they found traces of a fire, not yet completely washed away by the rain, and dried ashes nearby. Among the items that were taken for examination were knives with narrow blades that still had residue of plant sap on them, a bag of dried herbs that looked very similar to those Kelsey recognized during therapy, and a homemade diary on torn sheets of paper sewn together with string. The diary was the main find. There were almost no dates in it. Most of the entries were observations of the forest and brief thoughts about the life of a hermit. But on the last pages was a date that coincided with the day the hunter found Kelsey in the water. The entry consisted of only 2 lines. They found the girl. I couldn't take it anymore. She reminded me of her. I went deeper. This passage became the key to the psychological portrait. The psychologists who worked with the materials concluded that Claybornne probably suffered from a severe form of post-traumatic stress disorder after the death of his family. He might not have planned to kidnap Kelsey. The meeting in the woods, according to experts, could have caused him to have a distorted reaction. He perceived her as a replacement, as someone to be protected, controlled, and looked after in his distorted hermit logic. The fact that he was whistling a folk tune that Kelsey had heard only confirmed that they had had a long-standing relationship. And his disappearance on the same day that Kelsey was found indicated a sudden breakdown or fear of what he perceived as a threat to his world. The search operation was expanded. Rangers, dog handlers, and volunteers combed the forest. Some areas were examined with thermal imagers, although their effectiveness in dense forests was minimal. Several hunters reported seeing the tall man from a distance, but no one could confirm this. In most cases, witnesses did not approach, mistaking him for a vagrant or a lost tourist. The suspect left no trace, no new prints, no fresh campsites, no hint of where he went. According to the senior ranger who coordinated the search, he was a forest ghost, a man who disappeared before anyone could notice him. Tracking experts suggested that Claybornne could have gone higher into the mountains, to areas where there are no roads and where even experienced hikers hardly ever go. Another theory is that he went down to the old logging areas where abandoned barracks, mines, and wells still exist. Despite their efforts, the search was fruitless. It seemed as if Jesse Claybornne, a man who knew every ravine, every deadwood, every inconspicuous path, had dissolved among the trees as naturally as the fog over the forest. His trail broke off in the forest, quiet, cold, indifferent to anyone who tried to read its hidden trajectories. The official decision to suspend the investigation was made quietly. The Augusta County Sheriff's report stated that there is insufficient evidence to charge a specific individual and that a probable cause has not been identified and may be out of jurisdiction. The wording was dry, but the meaning was clear. Everyone realized that the trail had gone into the deep woods, as ruthless and silent as the place where Kelsey was found. Jesse Clayborne's name was left in federal databases as a wanted man, but the active search was suspended. Rangers pointed out that such forest hermits could move from area to area, hiding in old hunting holes, abandoned rubble, and rock crevices. Several times there were reports of a man with gray hair allegedly seen far from the trails, but these reports were never confirmed. For Kelsey, the months that followed were a long return to a reality she no longer fully recognized. Her medical records contain more than one entry about episodic memory lapses and sudden reactions to the sounds of water and rustling trees. She couldn't remember simple things: her favorite route in Richmond, the names of her colleagues, even the smell of her own apartment seemed foreign to her. Psychologists advised her to keep a diary, not as a therapy technique, but as a way to create a new chain of memories. In her first entries, she often used the words emptiness, fog, and shadow. One of them states, "I don't know when my life began, then or now." Her mother confirmed that Kelsey worked every day to regain herself. She walked familiar streets, asked about things she once loved, and looked through old photo albums. However, in some details, her memory behaved as if it were deliberately severing the ties between the past and the present. What scared Kelsey the most were her dreams. They repeated irregularly, but always had a similar structure. According to her, in her dreams, she saw a piece of space, a dark corner, an earthen floor, flickering fire, and a man's figure in the shadows. The face is never clear, always hidden or turned so that only the lower part of his cheek was visible, sometimes the line of a scar. Kelsey wasn't sure if it was a real memory or a product of her brain trying to fill in the blanks. In some episodes, the dreams were accompanied by smells of raw wood, smoke, rotten grass. Psychologists have noted that sensory memories often last longer than visual ones and can be more accurate than any images. But no one dared to draw categorical conclusions. The National Park Service conducted periodic surveys of the region where the last camp was found. Several altered areas of soil were recorded, but no explanation was found. In some places, the vegetation was trampled, as if someone had passed through recently, but the footprint system was disorderly, like that of animals. The detective who examined it wrote in his report, "This is the footprint of someone who does not want their path to be read." The police also have reports from tourists. One man claimed to have heard a whistle among the trees, a short tune he recognized as "The Water from the Y." Another woman said she saw a silhouette in the distance, standing motionless over a ravine, but it disappeared after a few seconds. These accounts remained unverified. Meanwhile, Kelsey learned to live with the fact that there would never be complete clarity. She slowly returned to work, avoided crowded places, and chose routes away from major roads. An entry appeared in her diary. "I am not afraid of the forest. I am afraid of what it knows about me." Although the case was officially closed, it remained alive in the minds of everyone involved in the search. The rangers still recalled Kelsey standing in the water, unresponsive to their voices. The detectives kept the map with the markings they found in the dugout as a guide to what they never saw. Psychologists called this case the phenomenon of a complete sensory break. The Appalachian forest continued to live its life. The trees grew, the paths became overgrown, and the wind turned over the dry leaves as if to erase the traces. The true story of what happened to Kelsey Lynn between June and November was never recovered, and all that remains is a woman who survived but did not get her truth back, and the shadow of a man who could be both a reality and a fictional projection of trauma. The forest has kept her secret, and it doesn't seem to be planning to give it away.